Hi there. I'm Geeta Nandikotkur, Managing Editor for Asia and Middle East with Information Security Media Group. I'm pleased to invite you to an exciting panel discussion on the most relevant and current challenge facing the CISOs, building a cyber-resilient enterprise, bringing the C-suite and the board along. I have a panel of security experts discussing how our CISOs aligning with the C-suite functions and the board in meeting their business objectives to build a cyber-resilient enterprise. Happy to welcome the panel. We have Mickey Lowe, Head of Technology and Cyber Risk at Galaxy Entertainment Group, Stephen Sim Kok Leong, President, ISACA Singapore Chapter, Colonel Joey Fontiveros, Commanding Officer, Cyber Battalion, ASR at Philippines Army. Welcome, friends. Thanks for joining us today.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon.
Friends, what I understand is leaders say security isn't enough in the current hybrid cyber war scenario, and defining resilience is crucial for an organization. Do you believe so, and why is it so? Can you elaborate? Maybe I'll go with Stephen.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. First and foremost, thanks for having me. Yes, it is ultimately about resilience by design, because we often talked about it's not a matter of if but when incidents will happen. And it is really no longer about not getting breached, but about being breached, but catching it early in the cyber kill chain or the hacker's modus operandi, being able to disrupt the hacker before significant business damage is incurred. I mean, you have seen many big companies being breached to huge losses. We have seen a big case of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies back in 2017, suing its insurer for US 1.4 billion of damages due to the NotPetya disruption. So it's really not only about the ability to limit the blast radius of an attack to contain an incident, but also the ability to bounce back up after a breach, to have adequate business continuity, to be able to continue business as usual. And all these entail a risk-based or risk-optimal mindset to look at security through a risk lens, achieving organizational goals while optimizing risk and resources.
Interesting. So, Mickey, any thoughts on that?
Yes, good afternoon. First, it's my pleasure to be to join this elite group of panelists. I'm currently the head of technology and cyber risk for Galaxy Entertainment. You see in the background of my screen is actually the company. As Stephen said earlier, cyber threat is imminent, is unavoidable. And now we're seeing more and more C-suite discussions on cyber resiliency. Now, I just want to spend a minute to try to differentiate between cybersecurity and cyber resiliency. As Stephen mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is really a measure to prevent and to avoid things from happening. And cyber resiliency is a mechanism to detect and also to recover when things happen. So just be able to protect and to avoid is not enough now. It's been considered by most of the Fortune 500 companies board that we need to be able to detect and to respond and to recover, and that constitutes part of cyber resiliency. In fact, interesting report that I've seen before from a survey done by World Economic Forum report, and a survey of S&P 500 companies, and indicate that around the membership, the board membership in terms of cyber experience has increased from 7% in 2013 to 28% in 2020. So we can see there is an uplift in terms of enabling the board to understand more on cybersecurity and cyber resiliency, and that can demonstrate the importance of it. And one thing we need to remember, our C-suite's role is to protect and safeguard the company business and the data. And now they recognize by doing so, they have to have a good cyber resiliency strategy in order to extend this safeguarding obligations to the clients. So sorry for the long answer, but the short answer to the question is absolutely yes, Peter. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, Joy, what's been your preliminary thoughts about having a cyber resilient enterprise?
Okay, in the military parlance, let me define military resilience as the capacity to overcome the negative effects of setbacks and associated stress on military performance and combat effectiveness. Resilience is about operational continuity. So on the business sector, they term it as a business continuity. So in the military, we term it as operational continuity. Developing a strategy for resilience is embracing the fact that no fortification is impenetrable. Okay, we have metrics for resilience. So we develop metrics. So when I say metrics, these are different activities wherein we can be assured of that we are building that culture of resilience among our ranks, which can be drawn from our cybersecurity incident management process. It tries to strike the balance on the dynamism of people, process, and technology, anchored on periodic cyber risk assessment, active leadership, proactive stakeholders engagement, risk management, threat modeling, zero trust defense in depth, data disaster recovery plan. Dynamic VAPT, this is different from, of course, the periodic VAPT, wherein this is time-bound. This dynamic VAPT that we are doing is threat-bound. It depends on the threat landscape. Tabletop exercises, skills competency roadmap. We develop the skills of our personnel based on their duties and responsibilities. And then, of course, wargaming and even gamification of cyber security to cultivate learning, cooperation, and interest among our personnel. This gamification is we develop a system, a platform, wherein it is similar to Hack the Box, Capture the Flag platform, but it is beyond that because we need to develop the intellectual acumen of our personnel, and then, of course, the offensive mindset and the counter-offensive mindset. So 3-in-1. So we are developing a 3-in-1 capability among our personnel. These are the many factors that shape the adaptive resilience in our rank. So, and it can be summarized as effective leadership, a culture where personnel are valued, establish collaborative ways, and a genuine commitment to collective learning. So this is, I have enumerated many things, but it can be summarized into 4. And that, I assure you that our ability for resiliency is very, very active.
Fantastic. Fantastic panel. That was the great context that you all have set. We can deep dive into some of the arguments that you had in your earlier statement as we progress. So thanks for that. So Stephen, I turn to you. You have been speaking to all the security practitioners and other functions, being the president of ISACA Singapore chapter. Yeah. So do you think the board, CEOs and CFOs and other C-suite functions understand cybersecurity risks, and to what extent? Of course, Mickey set a context about what percentage that security practitioners have gone up in terms of security being on the board. So good reference he brought in. So Stephen, any thoughts there?
Yeah, definitely concur with Mickey. The WEF results actually reconcile very nicely with the recent surveys that ISACA and the Singapore chapter conducted. There is definitely an increase in risk perception across all levels, no thanks to the number of breaches in the news, especially the last couple of months as well, right? As well as tightening regulatory frameworks. It is now a must for many companies to have a member in the board who understood or understand cybersecurity well enough to be able to provide oversight and recommend improvements to an organization's security posture, giving instructions to the executive team, and for the executive team to manage risk to acceptable levels, right? But having said that, the amount of recognition and understanding really varies from companies to companies, organizations to organizations, depending on their maturity levels. So I've worked with MNCs and also volunteered CISO as a service for SMEs and also listened to our membership. And it suffices to say that it can be from one extreme end on organizations that are just maybe startups and SMEs that have not even defined their own risk appetite. So you do not know, it's always a moving goalpost. You never know whether it is enough security controls put in place because there is no enterprise risk appetite being defined. And as Colonel Josh rightfully pointed out, there wasn't threat hunting, there is no risk assessment and defining what matters, business impact assessment and so forth. And while on the other extreme end of the spectrum, you have companies that have quantified risk in a very structured manner. They are able to quantify so well that they can say that this is the amount that will cost me if an incident happened, and that's the exact amount of cyber insurance that I will purchase to make to close whatever gaps there is to meet my eventual rescue risk. Yeah. Thank you.
So interesting. That was an interesting perspective you brought from ISACA, from your experience, Stephen. So Mickey, you have been a CISO and held important functions in the banking sector also in your earlier stint, right? So why and how do you think the C-suite and board look through the lens of risk management, cyber and resilience? And what's been your experience?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I've been in this field on cybersecurity and cyber risk management for the past decade for different financial institutions. It has been an interesting experience, which I can share more definitely. But looking at the recent development of the recent year and few months, as Stephen alluded to earlier, I would classify in this post-pandemic world, cyber risk frontiers have increased multifold. Business leaders now consider cyber more as an enterprise-wide risk as opposed to just an IT issue. And this is a very important change in terms of the risk landscape. I remember 15 years ago when I first started with so-called IT security, the IT department was the owner of all the risk implementations and security measures and so forth. The senior C-suite seldom engaged in the discussion, and they thought, IT department, you own security, you are there to fix it. But now we're seeing things changed. Deloitte has conducted a survey in 2021 on future of cybersecurity. 72% of the respondents indicated that their organizations have experienced between 1 and 10 cyber incidents in the last year alone. So this is a very significant number. And I have been hearing that there are only two kinds of companies that have been hacked and they are aware of, and companies that have been hacked and they are not aware of. So we don't have any, against my personal opinion, I don't think we have any organization in the world can claim they have not been compromised. This is just a bold statement from myself. Now, the C-suite, to your question, Gita, the C-suite must have highlight issue, and they have the responsibility to the board that they need to highlight issues that can potentially become a hindrance for the organization to meet these business objectives. So they need to understand how cyber resiliency implementation can address and help become an enabler of business. But in order for them to understand that, they need to understand the entire threat landscape. They need to understand what are the innovative technology and process and people that can help to implement a resiliency strategy. But most importantly, is how to measure the maturity cycle, the life cycle of the measures implementations. And since the C-suite is also has to report to the board, they have to figure out a way to create a storyline to tell the board members, not to fear them, but to state the fact that it's happening. And there are many, many cases out there. We're not making it up and so forth. And we can certainly make reference to all those published incidents as a guideline to how things can be attacked and what measures can be put in there. So all those are very important. And I think now the C-suite fully understand what they need to do. But right now, I would say what most of the C-suite I've seen is struggling. What is the right set of metric? How do we translate between technical terms, whether it is a SIM or whether it is SOAR or two-factor authentication, into something that we can discuss at the board, so that we can convince the board members this is the right thing to do, this is how we can move forward, and so forth. And that's why I'm seeing more and more C-suite members are more engaged in the day-to-day discussions on cybersecurity strategy, resiliency strategy, and so forth. Thank you, Peter.
That was, you were spot on, Mickey. I think now the board, the security practitioners are now speaking the language that the board understands in terms of discussing the maturity models and also in terms of the security metrics, which can have direct impact on the businesses, right? So that's fantastic. So Joey, I turn to you as the commander of Cyber Battalion in the Philippines Army. How do you see the board or top management looking at cyber, and how does one make a case for cybersecurity funding, Joey?
Okay, we now enjoy the support of the leadership of the Philippine Army, the acquisition of mission essential equipment, facility, training, cyber workforce procurement and development, fund support, the trust, confidence, and reliance of the Philippine Army on the cyber support of Cyber Battalion are all clear indications of the established relationship of top leadership with the unit. All of this, although all of these are just the outcome of establishing credibility. Credibility goes a long way, and we have this formula. The unit must be visible in its mandate, mission, and activities. On the part of our funding, requirement is a complex undertaking in the military. In the case of Cyber Battalion, it is born out of the mission. So we need to understand the mission. They need to understand the mission of the unit. The mission essential equipment that we need, determining the capability gaps, strategic alignment with strategic objectives, clear set forth plans and programs determined through prioritization. So we cannot satisfy, or we cannot buy at once. We need to prioritize our procurement so that we'll be supported. And effective narrative on cyber threat landscape. So these are critical determinants in the approval of funding for cyber requirements.
So
Yes.
when you put a case, for a military funding, it is very tangible. So, so many steps are there. But when you want to build a case for cyber, how hard do you need to push yourself?
So pushing it is really very hard, especially wherein there are no events that may justify our request. So there has been incidents wherein, of course, there are attempts in our system, in our network, that could possibly be, without being detected, could of course compromise our the integrity and confidentiality of our data. So, of course, being Filipinos, very resilient, very resourceful, we can always contain that. But the question is, up to when? That is the very question. So we really need to, of course, communicate such urgency for them to understand that the threat of cyber really is a big thing.
Big thing. Absolutely. Agreed. So, Stephen, so I want to understand from you, what differences do you perceive among the C-suite in making cyber resilience a business priority?
Well, definitely, as what Mickey has, I believe, put it, it has become a business issue, a business consideration, right? Because cybersecurity is no longer just a back office function. It's not a call center. It is really a business enabler and a differentiator, right? Nowadays, we talk about digital trust, and if the company is not trustworthy, consumers and customers are going to shun it. And especially now with more software supply chain attacks, trust downstream is also upstream is also becoming imperative. So the C-suite is really asking for assurance of posture across people, process, and technology. Really not only in terms of protection, but also in terms of detection, incident response, and recovery. That's what Mickey has alluded to earlier as well. So growing acceptance of the fact that cyber incidents are inevitable has sunk in more easily these days, as what we have discussed earlier. So increased tabletop exercises, not just at the technical levels, but also at the senior management and board levels for crisis management have become more frequently asked. Because how do you manage a crisis? Right, that is becoming more important, granted the inevitability of a breach. So the cost of breaches and the ability to recover in a timely manner are increasingly also being queried and in more quantifiable forms. And assurance has also gone beyond tabletop exercises, and as what Colonel Josh put it, war games and so forth, and to purple teaming exercises, right? To launch actual simulated attacks and to see how your blue teams, right, defend against the red teams, or to be able to, again, not just on the protect piece, but also be able to detect, respond, and recover, and measure the people aspect, the competencies, the processes, as well as the technologies, whether there's any gaps that you need to further brush up upon. And cyber insurance itself is really a tough topic, but has also been raised more often these days. However, it's really a double-edged sword, because hackers, as one of the ransomware gangs, I think it's the Revil ransomware gang, was being interviewed, and they alluded to the fact that they like targeting the clientele of insurance companies, because these are choice morsels, right, with guaranteed payouts. Yeah, they have the insurance companies to back them. So relying on purely insurance is a no-no, not to mention the increased volatile premiums and the limits and the exclusion clauses on act of war and so on and so forth. So really the fundamentals, going back to risk governance, having the right key risk indicators. Earlier on, I think there was mention about SIEM and SOAR security metrics. I think that is important to be able to reflect on the kind of threat landscape is out there. If your SIEM or SOAR is getting a lot of attacks, that shows the increased threat posture, and every block of those justify that investment that you put in place, right? Whether they manage to come in or you manage to disrupt even after the endpoint is compromised, your threat hunting, your EDI is able to pick it up, and you are able to contain it through zero trust measures. Those are justifications for investments, whether past or future. Yeah. So yeah, that's all I have to share for now. Thank you.
Great. So, Mickey, we heard Joey talking about how to build a business case for, fetching our security budget or funding for cyber security. And also, Stephen mentioned about how the C-suite is demanding assurance of your security posture. Do C-suites have visibility to the same data across the company and job functions in case of a cyber attack, cyber incident, and how to bring them along in case of an incident and to build the security posture?
That is thank you, Peter. That's an interesting question. Regarding does C-suite individual or do they have access to the same data across company? That the question is, should they have access across the data in the company, right? So that becomes a proactive access management, access provisioning. But the short answer is yes, they should have a view of what happened. And goes back to my earlier point. Now I'm seeing C-suite demanding the right set of KPI so that they can learn about how effective, how efficient the cyber resiliency measure in the organization is. And then they can ensure the right approach is put in place and so forth. And Stephen mentioned earlier, there's options always out there to have cyber insurance. We can certainly transfer the risk to the undertaker, but then there's also a limit in terms of what the insurance will cover. But most importantly is when things happen, it is the reputation damage that is non-quantifiable, which is also very difficult for us to justify or to explain to our board the kind of investment to match that brand name or reputation, as opposed to something that is tangible that we can quantify. We have the same challenge as what Joey mentioned earlier. How do we, justify our spending investment on security? But there's something I want to mention before I move on into the questions, if you don't mind. I'm seeing more and more evolution in terms of developing a risk threshold. This is very common, popular in operation risk management framework and operation management world. But now I'm seeing this to expand into the cyber risk management world as part of the governance that Stephen mentioned earlier. Without the definitions of the risk threshold or the tolerance, we cannot tell what is enough, how much we have to invest. Definitely the board doesn't want to spend $5 to protect a $1 asset. So where do we draw the line? Then we have to define this threshold in relation to the threat landscape. I think it's also what Joey mentioned earlier on. For each threat, we have to understand what is the likelihood of occurrence. Is it really tangible or unlikely? And what is the impact to the organization when things happen? So when we put the likelihood and impact together, that will give us, to a certain extent, a risk level of a specific threat, which then we can measure. And do we want to mitigate that specific threat, or do we not? If we want to mitigate, to what extent do we want to mitigate? And as you said in this panel, it's about risk management and cyber resiliency. We're not here. No one in the world can eliminate risk. We can only manage to acceptable level, and this is where we need to measure down to the threshold or the tolerance. Now, Stephen already covered a lot in terms of his response to previous question on the red teaming, blue teaming, tabletop exercise, and so forth. This is exactly what most organizations are doing right now, is to define a cyber attack incident. It's not an IT incident only. It is a organization incident. We need to address this from a organization crisis management team, which consists of all the key C-suite and business leaders. I would argue the unit need to be involved in responding to cyber incident. They are not IT. IT is there to recover and contain the damage and eradicate the viruses and so forth. But we need PR to manage media. We need our business to communicate to client. We need our legal to speak to the regulators. So there are many other aspects that people have to put in the drill in order to understand. Now, how do we enable that to take place? It goes back to my earlier point that we need to have a lot of metrics that will give this crisis management team all the information at the fingertips. There are things that we need to continuously measure as a metric. For example, number of intrusion attempts. We need the organization to be aware that, well, our doors are constantly being knocked. They could not come in just because we have a good door lock. But that does not mean they are not knocking the door. So middle of time, they may break the door. So those are the things we need to report as well. Every time when I approach my management, there's always one question they ask. can you tell me what our competitors are doing? So we need to benchmark constantly with our competitors and understand where are they, where are we, so that we know, are we ahead or are we falling behind?
As we wrap up, some closing thoughts I would like to have from you. What needs to change, both tactically and strategically, for enterprise security to build a cyber resilient organization? And where is the disconnect? Maybe I'll start with Mickey, in continuation of your earlier statement. Yeah.
Okay. One thing I would say the most important change is really to continue to raise awareness. The weakest link is our strongest link. It just takes one user to hit the enter key to open up a URL or a document, bingo, and then we have the virus or the ransomware and so forth. So continuously awareness. Now the question is, how do we raise awareness? Training is boring. Sending on material people will not read. So we need to think of a more innovative way to do that. And now we're seeing more attack, not just to financial institutions, but also to the entire ecosystem, especially utility companies. Why am I in the entertainment business? That's because we're also concerned about cybersecurity. Nowadays, there are many incidents about data being stolen. It's not about money being stolen anymore. Data is the asset. So I just want to continue 2 more items I want to mention. While we spend time looking at how are we doing in terms of cyber resiliency measures as an organization, we also need to understand what is these corresponding measures offered by our suppliers. So third-party risk management is a key area that we have to start looking into. And then while we have been talking about many incidents of committed by hackers externally and so forth, I think insider risk is equally important. Those are the 2 areas I would leave it to the audience as a takeaway. Insider risk, supplier risk, those are the 2 key areas. And key thing to turn the culture around is to make sure everyone understands security is everyone's business, not just CISO, not just IT. Thank you.
Great. So that was great, making everyone accountable for cyber incidents. Yes, Stephen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Mickey was really spot on when he mentioned about insider risk, because of late we have been seeing a lot of MFA, multi-factor authentication fatigue cases, where people just fall prey to OTP pushes and so forth, right? As well as supply chain attacks. When we talk about resilience, we cannot just look at a specific vendor. For instance, now we have been talking about cloud first strategy and a lot of use of cloud, and we need to start to think about extending enterprise security to a multi-cloud strategy, right? So to reduce concentration risk, because that will help us build a resilient organization. So again, risk culture, like as what Mickey has put it, is really absolutely important. Understanding the inevitability of a breach and having that risk-based mindset, recognizing that cybersecurity is a risk journey and has multi-layered defenses. It's about risk, not compliance, right? And it has to be timely reviewed because the landscape is very volatile, right? Besides that, the disconnect also happens when there is not enough awareness at the board and executive levels. Therefore, it's important to bring to the board's attention of the nature of threats, their inevitability, their volatility of insurance, cyber insurance, agility of attacks, and there are no silver bullets, right? And importance of looking at the strategy across people, process, and technology, and to put focus on detection, response, and recovery beyond protection itself to reach resilience goals. And finally, I think it's important that to be able to tip the asymmetry of attacks, we need to collaborate and cooperate.
Great. Yes, Joey, your final thoughts on tactical and strategic initiatives to build a resilient enterprise. Any use case you can think of?
Yeah, on our part, strategically, leadership support plays a vital role in building cyber resilient organization. The leader is central in the implementation and realization of all plans and programs attendant to organizational resilience. So tactically, cyber implementers and workforces should provide a common cyber operational picture and situational awareness. This will provide the necessary alignment and connections of all players in the cyber resilience ecosystem: the leader, the workforce, and the customers in the business world. The disconnect is the lack of leadership support. And where is that lack of leadership support coming from? It is the lack of appreciation. And where is that lack of appreciation coming from? It stems from the poor marketing side, or the awareness side that should be taken by our cyber workforces. The inability of the workforce to communicate urgency, relevance, and significance of plans and programs, policies for leadership approval. One thing is we need also to understand the risk appetite of the different key players of the organization. By then, we can really address and have solutions on this disconnect that we are experiencing.
Interesting, fantastic. So thank you so much, Mickey, Joey, and Stephen, for discussing the tactical and strategic approach that enterprise security needs to take to ensure that the board and the C-suite are on the same track in building a resilient enterprise in future.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, me again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A pleasure talking to you all. Appreciate your thoughts and effort. This is Geeta Nandikotkur for ISMG. Thanks for attending.